Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. So, what's the deal with the 10 most common misconceptions about God? Uh, it's occurred to me that many people out there have some very fundamental misconceptions about God and who God is and what God is. And a lot of these misconceptions can seriously undermine that person's proper conception of what God is. So I thought it would be helpful to go through some of these misconceptions and clarify them. So, number one, many people think God is physical. God is not physical, not physical whatsoever. God is an uncaused, non physical reality. God is a mysterious reality. And God is often referred to as the unmoved mover or the uncaused cause. But God is certainly not physical. God is what creates physical reality. But God is not physical. If God were physical, God would be created. And if God was created, then something would have caused God and would be greater than God. And thus, God could not be God. God is where the buck stops in terms of physical creation or physical reality. But that means God cannot be physical. Now, what does that mean, not physical? Because everything we know of is physical. Uh, it's mysterious. It's something that we know must be real in order for physical reality to exist, but we cannot comprehend what God is, except in the most general terms that God is an uncaused, immaterial cause of physical reality. God is different from just nothing or nothingness because nothingness doesn't have the ability to create anything because nothing comes from nothing. Uh, God, however, has the power, the uncaused power, to create physical reality. So that's what God is. A second misconception about God is people seem to think that God is made of parts. And this ties into the idea that people think that God is somehow physical. Yeah, God has to be physical in some way or fashion. And that's simply not true. God is not made of parts. Everything physical is made of parts, but God is not physical, and God is not made of parts. If God were made of parts, then God would be caused by those parts. And that would make God caused, and that would mean there was something greater than God that could cause God. And that would mean God was not God. So God is not made of parts. Now, that's a very mysterious, uh, unimaginable idea because everything we can imagine is made of parts. But God is the mysterious, uncaused, metaphysical cause of physical reality. It's not going to be something you can imagine. You can simply know that it must be real in order for physical reality to exist. This principle of God not being made of parts is referred to as divine simplicity, meaning divinely simple. God is simple, simple meaning not made of parts. A third misconception is that God is special pleading. Special pleading is an informal logical fallacy that says that you can't claim some truth, universal truth, but then accept your particular, uh, you know, pet, whatever it is, from that truth because you happen to like it. So you don't want to subject it to this universal truth. You're going to remove your particular desired thing from that universal rule, which you're using to eliminate everybody else. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. And if you're trying to make an exception for yourself or whatever your proposition is, then that's fundamentally unfair. And that's called special pleading. There's a common misconception that God is a form of special pleading. That is that, well, you say your God is real, but some other ancient group said their God was real, and there's another group down the street that says their God is real. So you can't claim that everybody else's gods are fake and yours is real, because that would be special pleading. That is, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So if you're going to claim the other gods are fake, then you have to apply that to your own God. A very common misconception about God. God is the uncaused metaphysical cause of physical reality. Uh, it's that God is commonly referred to as a Judeo-Christian God, the creator God. Um, However, that God is an uncaused God, unlike every other God in the history of man. So it's not special pleading if there's a justifiable exception to the universal rule. There's always justifiable exceptions. You can say, well, there's this rule, and it should apply to whatever it is that you want. But you can legitimately say, well, no, what I want is a justifiable exception to that rule. And then, of course, it's got to be true. It has to be a justifiable exception. There's always exceptions that are justifiable. And it's not special pleading. So in the case of God, God is uncaused. And that's the justifiable exception that separates God from all other pagan gods or other gods of other religions. All those gods, those other gods, you'll find that they are all caused gods. Look in their history or the mythology about those gods, and you'll discover that every last one of them is a caused being. They either have parents or they're made of stuff. If you're a pagan god and you're made of something, well, then you're caused, because you're caused by the parts that you're made of. So even some gods, ancient gods, are self-created. And that's also not uncaused. Self-creation is an impossible proposition, but some claim that you can create yourself, but that's impossible because you'd have to exist prior to your own existence in order to create yourself, and that's logically impossible. Plus, a self-created thing would be created by itself, even though that's not logical and it's impossible. But nonetheless, it would be a caused thing. So one of the big misconceptions about God is that people don't understand that God is uncaused, and that's a justifiable exception that prevents God from being special pleading. Okay, another misconception people have about God is that God is magical. God is not magical. God is uncaused and has an uncaused power to create physical reality. That's not magical. There's a reason because God has this uncaused power. Magic has to do with pure magic is something from nothing. That means you can do something and there's no reason or cause for that happening. That's not God. God has an uncaused power to create. It's a mysterious power. It's not a power created by physical reality. It's an uncaused power. But nonetheless, it's a power. So God is using an uncaused power to create. God is not using magic. God does not create um, from no reason whatsoever. No, it's an uncaused power that allows God to create. Uh, so don't think that God is using magical powers. It's actually just the opposite. God is not using magical powers. He's using an uncaused power to create. Uh, Now, there is some confusion. People sometimes confuse the idea of God creating physical reality out of nothing with the idea that God is using magic. And there's a fine distinction that you need to understand. When it's said that God creates out of nothing, and the term is ex nihilo, that does not mean that God is creating physical reality out of nothingness, out of a form of pre-existing form of nothingness. God creates physical reality. That's not what ex nihilo means. Ex nihilo means that God creates and physical reality uh, appears. It appears out of nowhere. It appears. It's the appearance from non-existence that ex nihilo refers to. It doesn't refer to actually creating something out of pre-existing nothingness. So it's ex nihilo is not a statement about magical abilities, that is the ability to create something from nothing. That's a misconception about what that ex nihilo means. Ex nihilo is not about creating something from nothing. What it is, it's about creating physical reality to appear out of nowhere, to appear from non-existence. All right. And another misconception people have about God is that God is human-like. God is not human-like. Uh, God is aware and has an intelligence and awareness. In fact, an unimaginable awareness and the greatest awareness that is logically possible. But God is not human-like in the sense that God has like a brain like we do and has this the perceptions that we do and consciousness. God is not human like God is far greater than that. Um, so God is not a Santa Claus figure. God is not Zeus living on a Mount Olympus. God does not have a physical form that God takes and comes to earth. That is God is not a he, not a she. God doesn't have a gender. God is an uncaused metaphysical cause of physical reality, not made of parts. God is mysterious, uh, but it's a misconception to think of God as some sort of demigod, human-like entity that can pop down on Earth and has arms and legs. Now, uh, it's important that that you understand that there is a definite misconception that people have that God is like Zeus or some sort of pagan deity. Um, Not at all. God is a very, very mysterious being and is an uncaused metaphysical cause of physical reality. That is a highly abstract concept that you need to understand if you want to understand God. Do not think about God as a human-like entity, like a Zeus. That's a completely wrong conception of God. Totally wrong. God is not a human-like thing. Another misconception: people believe that God exists in time. God is the uncaused metaphysical cause of physical reality. Physical reality includes time, so God creates time. God can't be subject to that which God creates. Logically impossible. Therefore, God is outside of time and space. God is not subject to time. God does not have a God time that God lives in. Uh, if God did, God would be subject to time and would be made of parts. And that would mean that there was something greater than God, time, and the parts that God would be made of. And therefore, God couldn't be God. So, uh, God is not, there is no God time. God is not subject to time. God does not uh, have days that God experiences. God is outside of space-time, outside the universe, uh, and that's again a difficult abstract concept to understand about God, but it's critical. If you don't understand that God is outside of time and doesn't do things in time, you can make a lot of mistakes about your beliefs in God. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. Um, there wasn't a time. For instance, some people say, "Well, what was God doing before the universe was created? Well, he was just hanging out, waiting to create it, for forever, for infinity." And the answer to that is no. God isn't subject to time. It doesn't work like that. God was not hanging out anywhere. God isn't subject to time. There was no To God, there was no before the universe because God is not subject to time. So there's no before and after as far as God is concerned. And I know that's a very difficult concept to grasp, but it's critical if you want to understand God and avoid these misconceptions. Another misconception that people have is that the creator God, the God that I'm talking about, is Jesus. Uh, Jesus was part of what's called the Trinity. The Trinity. And the Trinity is God the Father, God the Son, who is Jesus, and God the Holy Spirit. When I talk about the Creator God, the uncaused metaphysical cause of physical reality, I'm talking about God the Father. I am not talking about Jesus. Uh, the Trinity is an idea that has been provided through revelation, meaning that God told us about it through Jesus, and we simply have to accept it as being true. But it's a mysterious doctrine. The doctrine of the Trinity is mysterious. There's no logical way to explain it. But don't get confused. The God the Father, the uncaused God, is not Jesus. It's not the same concept that I'm talking about. Is Jesus God? Yes, but in terms of relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, in terms of relationship. But that's mysterious and a matter of revelation. Um, so don't think that this God that I'm talking about, this uncaused metaphysical cause of physical reality, is Jesus in the sense that Jesus was a man who lived and was a physical being made of parts. Jesus is in a totally different category than what I'm talking about. Jesus is in a relationship, a revealed relationship with God. I'm talking about God the Father. All right? God the Father. Don't confuse God the Father with Jesus. All right. Another misconception people have about God is that some people think God is the universe. God is not the universe. Not at all. God is an uncaused metaphysical cause for physical reality. God creates physical reality. God created the universe. So God can't be the universe. Um, Very simple. God can't be that which God creates. If God was what God created, then God would be self created, which is impossible because he'd have to exist before he existed. Uh, God is not made of parts. The universe is completely made of parts. Um, there's a total contradiction there between God and the universe. God is not made of parts. God is divinely simple. God cannot be the universe. It can't. The universe is a contingent thing that if God decides, he could make it disappear like that. That's not God. God is uncaused. God can't disappear or be destroyed. Um, Destruction requires the disassociation of parts. God doesn't have parts. God can't be destroyed. He's uncaused. Uh, Unlike the universe, which is contingent. So clearly, God is not the universe. And in fact, that whole idea that God is the universe is a major heresy. It's called pantheism. Pantheism. Okay, so avoid the heresy of pantheism. And let's go on to the next misconception, which is that uh, God is universal consciousness. The idea of universal consciousness is a pantheistic idea that the universe itself either is conscious or has its consciousness through conscious material beings like human beings, for instance. And there's some uh, pseudoscientific explanation for this, claiming that some sort of universal consciousness is required in order for anything to exist, because in order for things to be discrete at a level of quantum physics, you need to do what's called collapse the wave function, which can only be done through observation by a conscious being. So, and the collapse of the wave function has to do with the fact that at the quantum level, particles are in a very probabilistic distribution, a wave form, that until it's actually measured, you can't say it actually exists at any particular point in time. So, some people have taken this to claim that the universe must have some sort of consciousness in order for things to exist, because you need consciousness to collapse the wave function for particles and material reality to be discrete enough to exist. That's all goofy New Age thinking, and not true. But it does lead to this idea of universal consciousness. Now, God is not universal consciousness. God is not made of parts. The uncaused metaphysical cause of physical reality cannot be made of parts. God cannot be the universe. The universe is made of parts. It is impossible that God is the universe. They are two entirely separate things. The universe is contingent. God is not. So universal consciousness is a heresy. It's pantheism, but it's also frankly quite wrong. You clearly don't understand the concept of God if you believe in universal consciousness. They're incompatible ideas. God creates the universe. So any consciousness in the universe is created by God. And that consciousness, to our knowledge, is only human beings or animals, material consciousness, material beings having consciousness. God creates that. God can't be that which he creates. That's illogical. God's awareness is an uncaused. It's an uncaused awareness. It is not material consciousness. It's not made of parts. It's not a collapse of any material wave function. God creates those things. God can't be those things. All right. One last misconception. Number 10. One last misconception is that God is the laws of physics. Now, this is a very common misconception that atheist physicists such as Stephen Hawking like to throw out there. So instead of a God, they would claim that the laws of physics are God, because the laws of physics create physical reality. And because there is a law of physics, there is a physical reality. And those laws of physics are Platonic in form, meaning they exist on a higher level than material reality. But they're the cause for material creation, and therefore that's all the God you need. But those laws of physics aren't intelligent, and therefore it's not the God that most people think of when they use the word God. Now, God is not the laws of physics. Not. Clearly not. Uh, God creates the laws of physics. God is not the laws of physics. The laws of physics cannot be God because the laws of physics are created. A created thing has to be lesser than the thing which creates it. So the laws of physics have to be less than God. And in fact, the laws of physics are really just our um, our theories and mathematical models about the behavior of matter and energy in the universe. They're not a thing in and of themselves. They're not a platonic form of some sort. They're just a mathematical description of the behavior of matter and energy in the universe. So you can't equate, you can't raise them to something greater. They're not. They're just the way things, it's just the way we describe or predict the behavior of matter and energy in the universe. So trying to elevate the laws of physics to the level of a metaphysical cause for material reality is totally wrong. Uh, it's a huge misconception. Um, Now it's interesting. Just recently, within the last week, a study came out from New South Wales where scientists studying a quasar 13 billion light years away. And a quasar is basically it's a kind of star, a highly dense, very powerful star. Uh, they discovered that one of the supposed universal constants in physics, called the fine structure constant, which is a measure of the strength of electromagnetism, actually changes depending on where you look in the universe. Now, these universal constants are not supposed to change. Uh, our theories today say that the laws of physics are isotropic uh, within the universe, which means they're the same anywhere you look in the universe, any corner of the universe that you care to look in, you should end up with the exact same number for whatever the constant is that's being used. Well, it turns out that that's not true. One of those constants does, in fact, change depending on where you look in the universe or how far back in time you look. So, the further back in time, it appears that electromagnetism was stronger than it is now. And that gives the universe a dipole sort of shape, meaning that the laws of physics are different in one end than the other end, and that's a very interesting development that just occurred. And what's that saying? It's saying that, well, these constants that physicists have been using and that are a result of Einstein's theory of general relativity apparently change, or at least in one instance, the fine structure constant actually change depending on where you look in the universe. Um, well, that's that's an indication that the laws of physics themselves can change. And the laws of physics are not this one set of rules that doesn't change anywhere you look in the universe, some sort of platonic form. No, it appears that the laws of physics can actually change in our universe, depending on where you look. Um, and if something can change, then there's got to be something that can cause that change, right? How else can you explain the change? There's got to be something causing the change to occur. So that means the laws of physics are not these metaphysical constants throughout the universe that are sort of a substitute God for atheistic physicists. No, in fact, the laws of physics can change clearly. There's a cause for that change. Cause is God. See? Um, so clearly, the laws of physics are not God, and apparently, the laws of physics can also change depending on where you look, which means there has to be a change agent, something that changes the laws of physics. And so, obviously, the laws of physics can't be God because whatever's changing the laws of physics would have to be greater than the laws of physics, which means the laws of physics can't be God. That's an interesting study. There was another study that supported this idea that the universe has this dipole structure in terms of the fine structure constant. So, well, this is a very interesting recent development. Um, so there you go. There are 10 common misconceptions about God. And if you had any of these misconceptions, correct it. Correct it. Get the right view. So all these views, they're all wrong about God. Wrong. There are a lot of misconceptions about God out there, and I'm sure there are a lot more than the 10 I just listed. But these are some very popular misconceptions, and you should correct your understanding of God. I find a lot of people really don't understand God at all. They don't understand the concept of God, and this is very unfortunate for them. So smarten up and understand what God really is and why God must be real. If you have any questions or comments, or you have other misconceptions, or you think something might be a misconception, you have a question about it, leave a comment below and I'll address it. And press the subscribe button. I would appreciate it. All right. I hope you learned something. Take care.